My name is Kaustubi Harid from Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industries. We move on to the next chapter of our conference, which is Future of Job, Future of Work. And for all the delegates who have joined us in this session, I would like to let you know that we released a report called Future of Jobs in the inaugural session. And for this, we have a presentation on the report which will give you the highlights by Mr. Anurag Malik, Partner, Advisory Services, Ernst & Young, and Mr. Arun Pillai, Partner, Ernst & Young. Thank you.
The impact the next 5 years could have on these sectors. IT, ITS, BFSI, retail, apparel, and so on. Over the last 6 months, we've interviewed close to about 100 odd industry leaders, academicians, policymakers in the government, and worked on this report that we are releasing today. We'd spend only about 10 odd minutes just sharing some salient perspectives of this report. But it's a very detailed, comprehensive report, and I'd encourage each one of you to spend time, and I'm sure you'll find a lot that's meaningful in the report. There are a few perspectives, clear perspectives that emerge from this study. Perspective number one is around the changing landscape of jobs in the country. So there's no doubt about the fact that job creation rates, while the GDP has been growing, job creation rates in some of the core sectors in the economy have slowed down. You know, it's around employment elasticity decreasing. You know, it's also around the impact of technology. But as you look at the future, as we've looked at the next 5 years and try to do projections in terms of number of jobs, the interesting insight is that what's called job, the definition of what's called job in the country is going to evolve dramatically. And any discussion around the future of jobs has to be around this changing landscape. Very briefly, this changing landscape of jobs, yes, will have a lot of people like us who are in the organized sector, the 9 to 6 kind of jobs. But the percentage of people in a contingent workforce, you know, India, interestingly, we realize, has 24% of the world's contingent workforce, the highest. It's going to go up. New models of what we call jobs, be it the Uber Ola model, be it the model in terms of, you know, what e-commerce is doing to the country in terms of getting artisans and producers across sectors into mainstream workforce, technology-enabled solutions that's getting even people in the agriculture as part of the workforce, etc., etc. So that's perspective number one, is the changing landscape, and you cannot take the current frame of what's called job as the frame for the future. The other, and again, probably the most interesting revelation for us was that there are going to be three primary forces that will impact future of jobs in this country. Yes, exponential technology, the adoption of exponential technology, which is you know, AI, robotics, automation, etc., will have a play. But it's actually two more forces that will have, you know, an equal or probably even a more significant play. Number one is globalization, and globalization has multiple facets to it. Till many years, globalization and technology moved hand in hand for this country. So with technology and globalization, we created a lot of jobs in this country. Interestingly, there are early signs of reversal of globalization with what's happening in the US and the UK. That's clearly going to impact service sector. Manufacturing, interestingly, is still a sector where India is in the early years, and any impact would be a little more in the future. But many other factors, FDI flows in the country, you know, last year was brilliant for us. You know, the level of exports, the number of people that will go to overseas countries, or the decrease in the number of people who will go into overseas country for work will have a dramatic impact on the future of jobs. But interestingly, the number one among these three is demographics. While we talked about automation and jobs that can change and so on, as you look at number of jobs that will get created, as you look at the impact of, you know, jobs on different kind of sectors, interestingly, demographics is still the number one factor. So what we've talked about for a few years now, the middle class, the increasing consumption pattern would still have the number one impact on jobs in the country, job creations in the country. There are 12 mega trends under these three primary forces. I've not had the time to touch each one of them, but you know, if you get the chance to read the report, please look at those mega trends and how they'll impact future of jobs. So those are two perspectives. In terms of more specific sectoral impact and numbers, let me invite my colleague Arun to take this forward.
As Anurag just mentioned, we interviewed or we met close to around 100 CEOs, CXOs, etc. And we asked them their views or their viewpoints on these 12 trends. As you can see, 64% rated that demographic changes or rising middle class as one of the key trends, because they see in the next 5 years, that is till 2022, this being a key driver of jobs. Close to around 45% see the rapid adoption of technology in advanced markets affecting jobs. That's the prime trend in the globalization piece. And on the exponential technologies, many of them see that, close to 68% see that the fact that many of these supply chains are getting optimized being a key driver, in the way the future jobs would come. We have put together based on this survey and our own analysis, a 2020 snapshot on these 5 sectors we just mentioned. We spoke of 3 kinds of jobs. One is those jobs which would be new, which do not exist today, which would be there in 2022. We spoke of jobs which are there today, but their skill sets would be completely changed, or they would have significant skill set change. And finally, those jobs which have existential threat today. If you look at the IT sector, amongst the 5 sectors, the IT sector, among the 5 sectors, it's the one where close to 20 to 35% of the jobs face an existential threat. And almost 60 to 65%, that's around, would have changed skill sets in the next 5 years. And close to 10 to 20% of jobs we believe would be new jobs. The industry, or we spoke to respondents, they gave us a view, or they gave us a peek at what the new jobs could be. Some of the jobs we have put there, some like VFX artist, a computer vision engineer, etc. These are jobs which are emerging. Few signs of this are visible. Many companies are hiring people for these skill sets. The auto sector, again we see that substantial skill set changes there, while the threat would be less, because still the sector has, the threat of exponential technology is much less in the sector compared to IT BPM. Textile we found was one of the sectors which had the lowest threat with respect to exponential technology. That's what the industry respondents spoke of. Close to, although the textile sector, a lot of the normal technologies were optimizing the chains, the value chains. The apparel sector felt that it was a sector which would continue to employ people. The BFS sector is the 4th sector. This is another sector along with IT BPM which had significant job changes. The industry respondents spoke about 50 to 60% of job skill set change and close to 20-25 jobs fading away. And finally, the retail sector, if you can see, it's around close to 15 to 20% of jobs that feel threatened. We have put alongside all the new jobs which could emerge in these sectors. Finally, if you get a chance to go through the report, we put together certain recommendations. There's a whole load of recommendations, but we put the key ones here. First is with respect to the government. The first thing is we see a time window of 1 to 3 years. In the sense, when these exponential technologies, many industries in India start adopting, we have a window of 1 to 3 years. And this window is a time which is available for the government or for the education institutions to reform themselves, whether it is the technical or vocational education. Second is looking at the MSME sector. When we spoke to some of the leaders in this area, etc., the effect of exponential technology is hardly felt. In fact, the awareness was quite low. And that's where the role of technology, tool rooms, etc., which could be used to enable the sector to adopt these technologies, and which we see happening in some of the tool rooms which are currently being set up. The third big element was the role of startups. We see a lot of, when we speak to close to around 5,000 startups were set up in the last 5 years, and we see that many of them have the potential to transform unorganized sectors to organized sectors. And this is a significant, this is an area which requires a lot of attention, because in the process, while you also create jobs, you're also transforming a sector from being an unorganized one to an organized one. Finally, amongst the fourth recommendation is also about the development sectors. These sectors which largely dominated by the government, healthcare and education, key areas where technology deployment is we see the green shoots of this happening, where the key areas where these technologies could be deployed and much of the rural workforce could actually be trained to use these technologies to deliver these services. On the industry side, when we spoke to all the CEOs, the first thing which emerges is that the vision for these exponential technologies in the industry was not missing. In fact, was missing. In fact, many leaders had read about these technologies, had seen it, probably, but they have not felt the impact of it in that sense. So we feel that it's a time that the next 2 to 3 years, which I keep repeating is a window, it's time that the senior management looks at these sectors and builds a vision for their own companies for these exponential technologies. We also saw that, especially in NASSCOM, there is an effort to create collaborative learning ecosystems. The NASSCOM, as a industry association, has been trying to bring players together to build collaborative learning ecosystems. We believe it's a great model which other sectors also should look at. And finally, within the industry, again, we are having these initial trends we see. We see big companies looking at something called digital quotient, training their workforce right across all the organization levels. Large manufacturer looking at training their people, 10,000 out of the workforce in these skills. So we see that when we ask them why is it they're looking at training even the people at the workforce, they believe that if they're aware of the technologies, maybe the innovation ideas would come from the workforce. So it's not that we are talking of training people on technologies at middle or senior level. It's right down throughout the work organization. Academia, the other thing which was, when we talk to the industry and academia, what emerges is, in this kind of phase, beyond 3 years, what would be a most important skill would be a judgment driven, for picking up skills which help them to make judgments, which help them to do cognitive thinking and things like that. Yeah. And finally, when we talk individuals, I think we ourselves need to take a much more responsibility for lifelong learning. And we also need to look at how we can embrace the gig economy, because as we mentioned earlier, we see close to around a significant workforce looking at offering themselves as being part of this gig economy. So these are the key recommendations. The report speaks of further recommendations which are there, which we could read through. Thank you.
Thank you, Anurag, and thank you, Arun. That is an informative presentation about future of jobs, especially with the importance of stakeholders involved in the times to come. With this, I would like to begin with the session, the technical session panel discussion called Future of Work. India's preparedness for the adoption of Industry 4.0 at present is low and has only been initiated by a very few private companies. This session will witness deliberations on impact of ever-evolving technologies and innovation on future of work, a topic which has spawned many books, articles, journals, and conferences world over. With this, I would like to invite the chairperson of the session, Dr. K.P. Krishnan, Secretary, Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, the moderator, Mr. Venkatesh Valluri, founder and chairman, Valluri Technology Accelerators, panelists, Ms. Boonpala from ILO. She is the South Asian Director and Country Office, India. Dr. A. Didhar Singh, Principal Advisor to President FICCI. Mr. Rajiv Dubey, Group President and CEO Member, Group Executive Board, Mahindra & Mahindra. Mr. Bijay Sahu, Co-Chair FICCI Skills Development Working Group, President HR Reliance Industries. Mr. Pradeep David, GM Universal Robotics. Mr. Gopal Devanahali, CEO Merit Track Services. A very big round of applause for the panelists and the chair and the moderator.
Yeah, Yeah, the report will be made available. It's also on the web. You can pick it up. It's available for everybody. Yeah.
Good afternoon. So we'll try to keep this session exactly till 12:40, and we don't want to stand between lunch and all of you. So we'll try to keep this a little structured.
1:40 you mean?
Sorry, 1:40. I'm sorry. Yeah, not so early. Yeah. So I'll just lay out the structure for this session. The way we're going to do it is we've got a terrific panel over here. I'll be requesting the panel members after some initial remarks to quickly introduce themselves and also kind of talk about what they are doing in their respective industries. With Dr. Krishnan and Ms. Banuda, I'll really request them to talk about the policy framework. And the second part of the session would be very specific recommendations of what needs to be done, especially with an emerging economy like India. What should be the interventions we should be looking at in terms of preparing ourselves for the future, given all the technology that's kind of coming up. And we'll open it up for about 10 or 15 minutes for questions from the audience so that you can have the wisdom of all the people on the panel. So before I hand it over to people, I'll just make a couple of introductory remarks and we'll take it from there. Most of us come from the industry. And the way I look at it right now is, at least specific to India, for last many years or many decades, the way we have approached the markets or the growth of markets have been predominantly based on what I would call as product-driven market creation. So we've taken a product either from the West, from the developed world, and we have driven a market creation, and we've either pushed it down and said, yeah, this is a great product, we need to use it. And I think we need to turn it upside down now, given the societal pressures we are having. It has to be now a market-driven solution creation. What exactly does a society need? How do we need to uplift that society? And how do we create solutions for that? And then when you talk about solutions, it becomes a collective effort or a converged effort on technologies, on engagement, as opposed to doing it in a singular domain. Multiple technologies need to kind of come together to actually create solutions. I've been working with the Karnataka Knowledge Commission for now some years. And surprisingly, in the last few years, I've seen a plethora of technologies actually coming through. And somebody was talking about, I think the Ernst & Young people were talking about, that there's going to be an explosion in technology. And I think the session before that was on what skills we really need to make it future job applicable. A small company in Karnataka actually did a whole end-to-end solution in agriculture. It actually put drones on figuring out what the soil quality was. It figured out what kind of crops need to be grown. It figured out how drip irrigation needs to be done. It figured out how productivity needs to be done. And this is all technology coming together of different dimensions, actually building productivity. I worked at the smart cities space at the other extreme and figured out that in few of the smart cities that had gone into India, which were actually awarded for a few companies, it was actually very difficult to find talent who can actually execute that. So now you have two extremes of things happening where technology is really going very fast. You don't have skill sets that are there to actually execute on these solutions to uplift the standards of society. So therefore, when you talk about really, in terms of what the future is going to be, and if you're not going to skill them, the youth, the younger generation, for the solutions what the society needs, it's going to be a pretty damn difficult job. We can't imagine if a society is not trained and 50% of the society is not actually employed because they don't have the requisite skill sets, it can be a very, very dangerous social situation. So with this as a backdrop, what I would now like to do is to request each of the panel members, because each one of them comes from industries where some really good work is happening, is for them to explain how they are actually building these markets, how they are serving these markets, while understanding the technology is coming through very rapidly. How are they actually ensuring that their workforce is engaged, is trained, is actually prepared to look at the future? So I want to begin with Rajiv from Mahindra & Mahindra and actually start what is really happening in Mahindra & Mahindra to, look at these solutions. Rajiv, over to you.
So Mahindra & Mahindra is a federation of companies which operate across industries, so I cannot go deep. Clearly, we are in auto, farm, agri, we are in IT, we are in finance. The basic question that we have to ask ourselves in each of these, what is the problem that we are trying to solve, and for whom, and how are we going to create a value proposition that is superior to that of our competitors? That's 30,000 feet. We come down really to innovation and productivity. How do we unleash the potential of our people and do it better than our competition? As of now, the IT industry is under huge stress. It is having to reinvent itself. The auto industry is facing a huge change in the kind of fuel that will be used. So we may be seeing the death of the internal combustion engine. And what does that mean for all the structures that we have? I could go on like this for each of our businesses, but ultimately, we are talking about innovation and productivity. We are talking about the fact that it's not only technology, but also change management, because it involves human beings with their hopes, aspirations, anxieties, and fears. How do you keep them engaged? And without doubt, the one thing that is coming up loud and clear, it's not only skills, it's also attitudes. And it's about learning, unlearning and relearning, and doing that again and again and again. Before I close, intergenerational working together, the rising role of women, millennials, all that are real problems that we are having to deal with. And we are saying that given structures, processes, systems, and metrics, what is important is the culture of the place. And we are trying to create a culture where people do the following 5 things all the time. This is utopia heaven, but we are trying for it. Number 1, ability to use the whole mind, combining left and right brain. Number 2, being a multiplier, where you listen and you unleash the passion of people instead of being a control and command freak. Number 3, knowing how to manage fear and leverage failure. That's about innovation. Number 4, being open to all possibilities and not being a prisoner of our past, failure or success. And last but not least, ability to create trust by being authentic. Sorry for a mouthful, that's what we are doing.
Great, Rajiv. Thank you. May I request Mr. Bijay now to actually talk about what's happening in Reliance Industries?
Good morning. What we are trying to do essentially identify the emerging technologies which will impact all our existing businesses, and which are the technologies which have opportunity to build new businesses. And we continuously scanning, surfing, and finding out. And once we spot a technology which will impact any of our businesses, any of the processes of that business, whether it is manufacturing, telecom, retail, refining, oil and gas, exploration, whatever. So we are very progressive in thinking, how do we adapt those technologies, build a kind of talent base and the skills in those technologies so that we leverage those technologies to transform our existing processes and build the new paradigm. So that's what we are constantly looking at in respect of technologies. So we have identified most of the technologies early on, emerging technology, whether it is Internet of Things, mobile internet, advanced robotics, 3D printing, all that you are hearing, the technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, fracking, genomics, all those you are hearing about. So we have applied ourselves to what of that makes immediate impact and which of that create future business opportunities for us, and we build talent and skills for that. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Vijay. I'm going to request Mr. Pradeep David from GM Universal Robots.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Pradeep David with Universal Robots, and you all are wondering what's so new about robots, right? I mean, robots have been around since 1960, over, half a century ago. So what are we sitting here talking about robots and skilling? Well, because there actually has been a tectonic change in robotics. Just a year ago, ISO 15066 has been introduced, which allows robots and humans to work together. Now this, in a country like India, where we have tons of labor, it changes the name of the game, okay? So this paranoia that people have about robotics and taking jobs, I'm here to dispel that, okay? That's going to be my role in this, and I'm going to give you examples in India how a 20-person organization has embraced robotics, cobots in this case, taken the same person who was operating that machine and skilled him to operate a cobot. By the way, what's a cobot? A collaborative robot. There's one on the stage at the right there, if you can understand. It looks an innocuous piece of machine, but we all are used to seeing robots in a bad light. You've seen the Maruti Suzuki case where somebody was killed, right? Volkswagen killed there was somebody, a technician who was killed by a robot. This is what we hear about robots, taking jobs, killing people. Cobots are collaborative robots. These are safe to operate next to human beings. They create jobs. And that's what I'm here to represent. I'll give you many more details as we go along. A major theme, Secretary Krishnan here was mentioned about women. I want to give examples. For example, in Bajaj, which has 50% of labor is women. And I've got videos to show you how a woman is there thanking us for a cobot which she operates. She's not lost her job, but she's able to keep pace with the guy who she's working shoulder to shoulder with, because she's no longer tightening the bolts, which made her hands, ache at the end of the day. So technology is there to be embraced. We need to skill the people who are operating these machines into the next generation. That's what I'm here to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Pradeep. Thank you. And finally, I'll request Mr. Gopal Devanahalli from the industry perspective to kind of give his thoughts.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. I represent Merittrack, which is a testing and assessment company. We do assessments for corporates to hire employees, for the government to do the same, as well as for universities as they select students to join them. We're part of the Manipal Global Education Group, so we do a lot of skilling in universities, of course, but also reskilling, which is what is being talked about today. So we do a lot of that in the IT industry, in the banking industry. What we are doing from a Merittrack perspective, we recently launched an employability enhancement program called AceTrack, because one of the things that is required for new skills is cognitive abilities. Every report you read says that you should have the ability to be a lifelong learner, just like the past session they talked about. You should have the ability to think creatively. Cognitive ability jobs will become 2 out of 3 in the next 10 years. This is the kinds of things that are being talked about. So how do you actually measure cognitive abilities? And more importantly, what do you do once you find that there is a gap? So in the AceTrack program that we have launched, we don't just do the test, but we also have built an ecosystem to do something about it. So we administer a test, for example, in the second year of college, and then identify the gaps for those students. Then the college can do something about it, re-administer it again in the third year, and then the fourth year. So by the time they are ready to graduate, they can do something about these skills, which are either cognitive or communication. So that's one big thing that we've done. In the Manipal Education and Healthcare Group, we have embraced these exponential technologies ourselves, apart from reskilling. I'll talk more about it later on, where we have implemented, for example, Watson for cancer treatment. And it was a very interesting implementation, a lot of resistance from the doctors, about what does this mean and what does it mean from a future of work perspective as far as they're concerned. So that's something I'd love to talk about as we go along. Thank you.
Great. So you just got probably a flavor of. Yeah, I'll come to. Yeah. So you probably just got a flavor of what the industry is doing, from EVs and Mahindras to cognitive intelligence to data modeling to predictive intelligence. So really getting the cutting edge skills happening in the country today. And as I get on to more the overview and the policy framework from the other three learned members of on the dais, it's normally said that now, earlier when I graduated at 20, it was most of us, the gray suit guys, it normally was said, by the time 60, you hit 60, you'll be okay to work. But the jargon and the discussion is now becoming more and more very prevalent that probably the working age gets down to 45, 40, 35 as these skills get more and more, either useless or they're no longer applicable. So there are industries who you just heard of kind of the technologies they're already talking about from a future sense. Now let's look at it more from a policy standpoint, from an emerging economy standpoint, India specifically. And before I ask the chair of the session, Dr. Krishnan, to come, I'd really like to hear from Ms. Panuda as a director of ILO, and from then Didar, and then finally with Dr. Krishnan. Just from a policy standpoint and from a larger perspective, when you really need to look at societies of this kind of a change that's beginning to happen, how do we address this? Because this could be a social challenge, frankly. If you're going to say, by 35, by 40, your skills are going to be redundant. How do you actually create this advancing learning mindset in societies so they actually stay, valuable and relevant in the future? Not that our age span is coming down. As the health improves, you see that our lifespans actually go up. So you got really a dichotomous situation here. That learning skills is going to be one issue. Your lifespan increases. You're not going to be gainfully employed. Then how do you actually manage this, and what is the overall strategy from a policy standpoint we need to do? So I'll start with you, Ms. Panuda. What is your take on policy, emerging economies as a director of ILO?
Thank you, sir. First of all, let me also put a point before I talk about our region, that I just like to mention that the fact that the world of work is changing very fast, and policymakers around the world really take the issue of future of work into their day-to-day policy thinking quite seriously. And in the context of the ILO, recognizing these policy challenges around the world of work, the changing nature of work, the ILO Director General has launched the global initiative, the Future of Work Global Initiative. And only last month that the Global Commission on the Future of Work was set up. And this Global Commission is chaired by the Prime Minister of Sweden and the President of, I forgot the country, Mauritius. And I'm very happy to share that Dr. Didar Singh has been nominated as a member of this Global Commission. I think this is a pride of India, and this is so important for India voices, India experience, to be influencing the work of this Global Commission to shape the thinking at the global level. And the work of this Global Commission, they've been produced a report to be submitted to the ILO conference in 2019, when the ILO becomes 100 years old. And there are 4 areas around the future of work that this Global Commission will debate and produce the report on. One is around work and society. The other is around decent work for all. And the next, which is quite relevant to the today discussion, is the organization of work and production, which technology is very much central to that debate. And the last one is around the governance of work. Now, coming back to our region, to Asia Pacific region, what I have seen in my work in the ILO is that there's pretty strong preparedness in terms of understanding the changing world of work, in terms of what sectors of jobs that potentially could be lost, and where new jobs are to be created and are being created. I have seen that at country level, all countries take very proactive research, policy debate, and also look into some specific areas of work which could be potentially very important. One example I like to cite, the ILO is working with Thailand, the Philippines, and Indonesia to look at the kind of skill set for women, in particular for women, to be included in the emerging labor market where there are job opportunities which are science in orientation, which are technology oriented, because we know that the convention in the past, not today, the convention in the past that women are no good in technology, women are no good in science, those are things of the past. Those are the myths of the past, not today. Huh? Dr. Singh, you take this to the Global Commission, please. It's not today. And certainly not in Asia, and I'm sure not in India. So I'm very excited that we have this kind of initiative to take some sectoral focus, to look at gender-specific where women and men will have new job opportunities. And I think in the Western countries, the work of the ILO, renewable energy, for example, is one area that generate lots of jobs, also bring in new technology. I also can see that this is a sector that most probably in our part of the world is also important, and there's also will be opportunities for job, for new technology into these sectors. So for this round, I would say preparedness is important. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So I'll turn it over to Didar. Didar, what are your thoughts on this, Dr. Singh? Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam. Thank you for informing everybody about this Global Commission, which is a very big thing, and I think it reflects really the importance of where we are going and where we need to be a little careful on the future. In fact, I must first begin by congratulating the Secretary Skills who joined us on this particular session here, and he was there earlier also in the conversation. This just shows the importance that government is actually placing on the whole matter of jobs and the whole matter of work as we go ahead as a country and as an economy. In that, I will first flag very, very quickly that FICCI itself has done a lot of work in this area, and you might like to look at some of the work that has been happening here. We did a major report on BRICS, which was all about skilling, which are the kind of skills that are needed in the new environment across the 5 BRICS countries. Shobha has that report, and you can have a look at it. We are working more on it, and now today you heard the inauguration, and you heard for 10 minutes somebody also explained to you what it was, the Ernst & Young people we worked with. They did this particular report on the future of skills and jobs in India. Why are we doing this? And here I'm going to throw the sort of debate open, and I hope that Secretary will also react to this. You know, the world, that is, all of us, including emerging economies and the rest of the world, has actually been on a high. For 70 years, we have seen no wars, no major pandemics. We have not seen real poverty around the world. We have actually seen a really tremendous growth for 70 years after the Second World War. What did this actually do? It brought standards of living, raised standards of living across the whole world. Investment increased probably 50 times. Trade increased 20 times. GDP across all nations increased and people did better. What was it? We are a business organization. What do we really look at? What is it that production actually produced? There are 3 factors of production: land, labor, capital. Land is all natural resources. Yes, it is limited, but we are able to increase productivity despite the shortages of land. Capital has exponentially grown. Capital today is freely available across all countries, including emerging economies. And capital, incidentally, includes technology, because you buy know-how. This is actually upon us. And it's upon us in the future of work in one particular thing that you heard mentioned by Ernst & Young report also, which is artificial intelligence. The future is AI. The question is it also the present? Because why is everybody today worried? They're worried because the third factor of production, labor, land, capital, labor. What is going to happen to labor? That is the biggest question staring at all of us. And in India particularly, that's why you have the skills secretary here himself. We took a conscious view that we must prepare for the future by running the world's largest skilling program. What is it trying to do? It's trying to provide, to manage the future of skilling, because skilling itself is going to entirely change. And this is the big question for ILO also, and I think this is what the Global Commission really will need to look at. That while you look at capital, while you look at land, how will you look at the context of labor in the changing environment of the 21st century? That is the big question. And as we discuss today and as we move on with it, I hope that even some of the answers will be here. This particular report has looked at 5 particular sectors and shown you 3 basic important categories so far as human resource is concerned. There is going to be a loss of jobs. They have talked in terms of redundancy. They have talked in terms of people, jobs which are a threat. It's a very large percentage. Usually around 30% is at risk here. They've looked, however, at new jobs which are being created, and that ranges from 9% to 20% across these 5 sectors that we are looking at. So new types of jobs will emerge. But the third part is the one which is most important to all of us, which is that existing professionals and workers will need to retrain. It's all about changing your capacity. And that is where the skills ministry really has a very important role to play. How do we manage to reskill even all of you, all of us, in an environment? You saw that as individual, what was being said by this report. You need lifelong learning. What does lifelong learning mean? It means you learn a new skill every day. Can you do it? Can each of us do it? That's why this whole skilling context is so important. It's not, as Secretary mentioned earlier also, it's not about the hype that you create, it's the actual reality of the work that you create. The ability to do and perform tasks in the future, and I think that's what today's debate will all be about.
Thank you, Sridhar. So I'm going to turn it over to the chair now, to Dr. Krishnan, to really look at how the government of India, having understood the magnanimity of the issue which we are facing, given a major demographic dividend, what we have in terms of age, what exactly from a policy intervention standpoint should we all be collectively working at? Dr. Krishnan.
Thank you, sir. I work in the government as part of the team that's bravely taking on the challenge of enabling India to skill itself. And I'll sort of take this opportunity to follow the example of my neighbor and my senior from college, Mr. Dubey, in giving a quick 30,000 feet overview of the Skills India Challenge and what is it that the government is attempting. These are numbers that most of you are familiar with, but I think these are useful to remember because the scale is important. 6 to 7 million people approximately, and these are estimates, who need fresh skilling. Besides this, there is a large number who require additional skilling, or what Mr. Didar Singh called continuing skilling, upskilling, and there's a whole category of what is called recognition of prior learning. So fairly large numbers of people who need to be quote-unquote skilled. And keep in mind, a bulk of them are likely to be A, dropouts, or B, rejects of an education system which is in itself, as all of us know, not necessarily very robust. So we are talking about a fairly significant learning stroke skilling challenge for a very large number of people. As against this number of 6, 7, 8 million in that range, the formal vocational education training system of India, the maximum that it can produce today, if it were to work at 100% of its capacity, is 2.5 million. And we know individually many examples of outstanding private foundations, governmental ITIs, and training partners, training centers, which produce excellent, skilled people. So there are very many examples of individual excellence, but I think all of us also know, both in terms of data on the subject, studies carried out by international domestic agencies, as well as anecdotally, that excuse me, a bulk of the output of our vocational education training system is of very indifferent quality and low employability. And all of this at a time when we are talking about lifelong employability. We are not even able to handle the challenge of the first job for many of these aspirants at a time when the phrase that we need to be, or the paradigm that we need to be worried about is lifelong employability. The previous session spoke about the aspirational side of skills. So to sum up, increasing scale, improving quality, working on aspirations, and all of this, given the urgency of the problem, working on all of this with speed is, in short, the Skill India challenge. And added to it is the additional complexities that each of my preceding speakers spoke about. The entire ecosystem, in a sense, changing in a dramatic way. And I think in addition to the complexity of scale, etc., that I mentioned, the other problem that India will need to grapple, and this is not peculiar to the skilling system, is the dualism. India will need to continually handle a very base level of challenge of producing the conventional carpenters, plumbers, masons, mechanics of a kind, because regardless of what happens to Industry 4.0, etc., we still are woefully short in a lot of these basic skills. These will need to be produced. In addition, we will need to produce people who are parallelly able to handle in these domain and other domains, Internet of Things, what he spoke about, cobots, and perhaps very cutting-edge aerospace technicians. So scale, quality, aspirations, and all of these additional complexities, and all of this at 120 kilometers per hour. And remember, this is a concurrent list subject in the Constitution of India. It's not entirely a federal subject. It is explicitly referred to in entry 25 of list 3. Besides that, there is a clear philosophy of the present government repeatedly outlined by the Prime Minister of cooperative federalism. So states have to be an important set of partners in this. And since employment is the focus and low employability is a known fact, genuine industry connect is the other additional requirement. Plus, the institutions of excellence that I spoke about, a large number of them are typically run by foundations, religious institutions, and non-governmental partners. So in sum, scale, quality, aspirations in a very complex world with a set of very complex partners is what we are attempting. If there is time, one can get into the innumerable details of what's being done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnan. So I think that was a very apt way of stating that dualism is what is required. Zoom in and zoom out. You need at the base level certain basic skills for the society, which you cannot wish away with. And at the same time, at the other end of the spectrum, you need the high-tech skills, which will actually change our society dramatically in the future. What we want to do now is to actually have as much time as we can for a Q&A session, rather than we kind of bringing a monologue to you. We have 10 minutes. We certainly want a good gender equality over here. We would like to have at least, if there's 10 minutes left, so let's take about 3 questions from men and 3 questions from women. So we'll start with the women first, and please ensure that you address to each of the participants rather than to only one participant. Please, the floor is yours.
Hello. I would like to bring out a point to ponder upon. Most of the times we think about training the people and skilling the people. But are we thinking about, are they willing to be skilled and trained? We're not thinking about the mental frame of the students who are coming in. Most of them, they may be failure of an educational system, or they may be dropouts of somewhere, or they may have a financial problem that they cannot go for higher studies. So we have to work more on the mental frame of the students so that they will be skilled to work in a skilled economy. I would really like to listen to, is something being done in this area?
Okay. So I think the way we take this, let's take a few more questions. We'll take a summary of them because some of them might be repeats. So we'll just consolidate and we'll have the answers. Anybody else? Lady in the front.
Yeah. I'll just, this is a supplementary, little elaborate to the question. But the lady
is there a comment or a question?
It's a question.
No question.
Okay.
It's a
so
question.
Let's be very specific to the question.
Yes, specifically to Dr. Krishnan.
Yeah.
So presently we are having 2 parallel systems of skill education in the country. One is through the set of ITIs, that is 18 or 20,000 of them, both government and private sector. Parallelly, we are running 3 schemes like DDU-GKY by MORD, PMKVY, Himmat, Sagarmala, all these. In the first set, the student has to spend money. In the second set, the money is spent by the government. And in both the schemes, what is found, the willingness, in the earlier question, what is read, the most difficult and serious part is to get people from rural India to come and read here. The money comes later. Even on DDU-GKY and PMKVY, which is totally free, and employment link, there is no taker.
Sir, what is the question?
That's the question. Either the skills should be rationalized, everything should be free or paid, and much effort should be put to that.
We got that. Yes, ma'am.
We all know that fourth industrial revolution is now a reality. We are talking about skilling people, skilling students, and one of the delegates pointed out about training the trainers. That's really very good. But my question is that we all know that there are about 8 to 9 verticals of Industry 4.0. So to make it a reality, we need to train all the people concerned, the stakeholders, in a holistic manner. So the entire curriculum of the universities and the institutes into it needs to be, totally revamped. So what are we doing in that direction? Because just skilling it in pockets would not serve the purpose, looking at the, size of our country and the number of people into it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Sir, question.
Yes, please.
Why are we actually still continuing? I posed this privately to Mr. Krishnan also, but why is it we have to do so much regulation on the input side? Why is it we have to determine what a center ought to be? Let the industry determine that. The government can set standards for certification and assessment alone. and say, yes, these people are competent. This is my question.
Okay.
Yeah. Sir, my question. Sir?
Yes, ma'am.
My question is to Mr. Rajiv Dubey. He talked about the culture, and even I feel that our students or people require so much of discipline. And with the technological advancement, when we have bullet train or anything in technology, we need to be very precise, methodical. So how do you train people in this culture? Especially Indians, because I think they lack discipline. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one last question, please. We already have 7 questions here. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. Today's buzzword has been the ecosystem, and with reference to what Dr. Krishnan said, my question is to Mr. Gopal. Do you conduct an assessment which includes impact assessment post-training, say a year after the student is trained? Do you do a study of that? Because in our small microsystem, we have seen very upsetting results. So are you conducting such an assessment also?
Could I just add something about education?
Sorry, can you raise your hand? Yes, ma'am.
I belong to University of Delhi, so I talk particularly on the platform of higher education. And it is an endeavor of UGC as well as universities to put skill component in the regular higher education. So even in the undergraduate, from 2 to 4 skill programs are taught now, at least in Delhi University last 2-3 years. But in other parts of the university, maybe a number of years are a little more, maybe 4 or 5. So there is an integral skill component. So there should be some hand-holding of higher education fraternity and the job market and the skills that can be offered under SEC programs. The skills that are given now are very contemporary and are upscalable to market. But I would still continue to reiterate that the purpose of higher education is particularly to give emphasis to intelligentsia and cognition bank, the knowledge bank, and not just practice. But it is a very good initiative of people of fraternity of higher education to weave skill as a normal component and not just pitch it at the level of dropout. And that is something which is very important.
We got that, ma'am. Thank you. So what we're going to do is, I think a lot of them are addressed to Dr. Krishnan. We have 2 questions, one for Mr. Gopal and one for Rajiv. Gopal, you want to start?
So and one last question.
At the end we'll have Dr. Krishnan address all the questions.
Sure. So to answer your question, absolutely, impact assessment is what we are planning to do with the ACE-TRACK program, wherein we are saying that you can't just go one-time assessment and identify the gaps and do nothing about it. So we are saying an assessment has to happen with a college student, say in the 2nd year, find out what the gaps are, then the college can do something about it, do an assessment again in the 3rd year, and do it again in the 4th year. So that's the way the whole program has been structured. So I completely agree with you that impact assessment needs to happen, because the whole idea is what do you do to ensure that those cognitive abilities gaps are addressed during the course of the university system. I'll also try to answer the lady's question on the university side. I completely agree with you. If we have to produce the skills required for the Industrial Revolution 4.0, our university content has to change. We are doing some experiments there. For example, in one of our universities, we replaced a core curriculum, a core course with a fully online course with the latest content available from a university from Europe. This was done. Initially, a lot of resistance from the professors. Then they actually, kind of accepted it. The students loved it. And now this is something that we're going to continue to do with either optional electives or program electives. So that's the way that thing is being structured. So change is happening. It is starting, but I think we don't have a choice. We need to embrace, because today the faculty and the colleges are behind what is needed, especially since things are going to change very rapidly. New technologies are going to get introduced, and you need to have access to knowledge throughout the world and impart it to the students. So that's the way it needs to work.
Thank you, Gopal. Rajiv, you want to take the next question, please?
Sure.
Yeah.
So culture in any organization technically is created through the HR lever. So let me not get into it. I think the most important thing is, do leaders walk the talk? What kind of role models and what kind of heroes are talked about in the organization? And then to back it up, you have the HR levers. How do you recruit people? How do you induct them? How do you train them? What is the performance management system? Very importantly, the reward and recognition system, and then the communication that takes place.
So, Dr. Krishnan, I'll leave it for you to take the rest.
It's 1:45 by the FICCI watch, so I'll just take 1 minute. There were many observations, not all of them I'm going to be able to deal with. I'll try and deal with two very specific points. If I understood you right, your last sentence was something about everything should be free. My preference, based on the evidence that I have seen in the last 6 months in this sector, is the exact opposite. Fee-based training and the evidence in the rest of the world, either paid for by the trainee or by the employer, on the average seems to be far more effective, both in terms of learning and in terms of productivity increase and wage increase. So there is a lot of people, at least the academics that I have spoken to, who think that massive government funding has actually created a distortion in a market which was just beginning to flower. So it may be the opposite of what you said. I'm not sure if I understood you right, but since you're nodding, I'm assuming you're agreeing with me. Number two, I've answered you privately on why we need to regulate inputs. The answer is, if you are in the business of training people on CNC machines, government regulation needs to prescribe that you need to have a building and you need to have CNC machines, because this is not CNC machines to be learnt on the internet. This is CNC machines which need to be worked on. So skilling the world over necessarily has an on-the-job or a practical training component, and in every known skilling regulatory system, there are prescriptions on some of these requirements. Now, having said that, if you are making general statement that there is over-regulation, it's one of those motherhood and apple pie statements. It's difficult to disagree with it. I can turn it around and say, with all these regulations, there are at least 6,000 ITIs which are working in 1/4 of one room. So, if there is over-regulation, there is complete dishonesty on the other side. So, I think these are very generic type issues, but your point is well taken. There is need for less prescription, and probably it needs to be combined with greater focus on certification and assessments. It's an unexceptional statement. I agree with that.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnan, and thank you everybody on the dais. Really appreciate it. Please enjoy the lunch. Thank you.